A warm welcome to the world today. Here's what's coming up within the hour. French politician Marine Le Pen barred from running for public office for 5 years after being found guilty of embezzling European funds. At least 5 people killed following an explosion at a mine in northern Spain. Plus, US Doge director Elon Musk gives away $1 million checks to voters in Wisconsin. Let's begin the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Politician in France, Marine Le Pen, has been barred from running for public office for 5 years. She was found guilty of embezzling European funds to finance her French far-right national rally. This morning, a judge handed down a guilty verdict in the trial that saw the leader of the national rally and former presidential candidates and more than 20 others accused of embezzling EU funds. A court found that RN had taken on EU parliamentary assistants in Brussels, but given them work for the party, still using EU funds to pay them. Ms. Le Pen stormed out of the courtroom shortly after the judge declared her guilty. She was sentenced to an automatic 5-year ban from running for public office, which take her out of the presidential race. Now, this means the national rally will have to start looking at Plan B for 2027. Plan B being that the party's president, Jordan Bardella, will run instead. She was also given a €100,000 fine and handed a 4-year prison sentence. 2 years will be spent with an electric tag rather than in custody, and the other 2 are suspended. Her lawyer says she will appeal these sentences. The European Parliament's legal team has welcomed the verdict, but many European politicians, most of whom also represent far-right parties, have condemned the sentences. In other news, the Kremlin has downplayed tensions with the U.S. over Ukraine ceasefire, saying instead that work is ongoing with Washington. Dmitry Peskov, a government spokesperson, was reacting to an outburst by U.S. President Donald Trump. He was very angry and pissed off with Russian President Vladimir Putin over comments about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Putin had said on Friday that Zelensky does not have the legitimacy to conduct peace talks, with the Russian leader floating the idea of placing Ukraine under UN control. Trump also threatened to impose extra tariffs on countries buying Russian oil if Putin did not agree to a ceasefire. Later on Sunday, the U.S. president told reporters he and the Russian president had always gotten along well and that he did not think Putin was going to go back on his word. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Putin does not care about diplomacy and called for further pressure on Russia to end the war. Well, staying in the region, the U.S. president has accused Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky of trying to back out of the minerals deal expected to be agreed between the 2 countries as early as this week, adding that Volodymyr Zelensky would face big problems if he did not sign an agreement. Ukraine has highlighted that the conditions of the deal changed significantly in recent days. Trump was speaking to reporters aboard the Air Force One on Sunday. He told them, "I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal, and if he does that, he's got some problems. Big problems. We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, you know, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that, so if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems." Meanwhile, Zelensky said last week the conditions of the deal being negotiated are constantly changing, but overall, Ukraine feels positively towards a future agreement. While Russia and Ukraine continue accusing each other of attacking their energy infrastructure, despite U.S. brokered promises not to do so. The defense ministry in Moscow this morning said in a statement Ukrainian shelling caused a power outage due to a power line breaking in Russia's Bryansk region. In the same region, Ukrainian drones attacked an electricity substation yesterday evening. It said the continuing deliberate attacks by Ukraine against Russian energy facilities show that the Kyiv region, is totally incapable of keeping any commitments relating to conflict settlement in Ukraine. Also this morning, the head of Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region the administration leader of the administration there, Ole Sinabov, told Ukrainian TV a number of settlements were left without power due to Russian shelling, despite the constant danger. Emergency workers have restored power to almost 2,000 households. We segue now to U.S. economy and politics. Stock markets have fallen again as Trump prepares to unveil a massive slate of import taxes on Wednesday, which he's dubbed America's Liberation Day. Global stock markets also fell as Japan's Nikkei index closed down more than 4%, while in London the FTSE 100 lost around 1% in early trading. It comes after the U.S. president suggested that new tariffs he's set to announce this week will hit all countries, not just those that have the biggest trade imbalances with the United States. Joining us now is economist Johnson Chukwu, who joins us from Lekki. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I appreciate your spending time with us this holiday. What do you think the U.S. President Donald Trump has? Why do you think he's made these tariffs a central part of his economic vision? How is this expected to work to U.S. advantage?
Thank you, Amarachi, for having me. Donald Trump has three objectives in imposing tariffs or import tariffs. One of which that Donald Trump wants to raise revenue, which he believes will be enough to cover the U.S. budget deficits. Secondly, Donald Trump wants to reshore manufacturing or to reactivate manufacturing in the U.S., believing that this will drive manufacturing activities in the U.S. And the third factor in the U.S., Donald Trump wants to use tariff as a tool for foreign policy management or foreign policy direction. These are the three objectives that Donald Trump intends to achieve. Initially, he had said that he was going to impose it. The understanding earlier was that the tariffs were going to be on countries that the U.S. have trade deficit with. But interestingly, I think on Saturday, he announced that the tariff will cut across every country and will be a reciprocal tariff, which means he's going to impose similar tariff rates that countries impose on USA, every other country impose on the US goods. And that's...
We seem to have lost the signal.
Revenue through tariff import and encourage imports, encourage manufacturing in your country.
Oh dear, I do apologize. We seem to be losing signal with Johnson. We're trying to reconnect with him soon. In the meantime, Spanish authorities say at least 5 people have died, 2 more missing after an explosion at a mine north of the country. A blast happened at the Cerredo mine in the Ghana or Asturias, some 450 kilometers northwest of Madrid, around 9:30 in the morning. Local emergency services said they've been called about a problem with a machine at the mine. At least 4 others were injured and a search is underway for the missing workers. Ambulances, fire and rescue services have been sent to the scene. Local media, citing the Asturian spokesperson, reported that workers had been at the mine under a permit to extract minerals to produce graphite. According to ABC España, the site had been a major mine before it closed in 2018 and had since been intermittently used by private companies to extract mineral anthracite. It's not yet known how many people were at the mine at the time of the explosion. So another disaster. It's been 4 days now since the 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck on Friday in Myanmar. We're learning more than 2,000 people have died and more than 3,900 injured. 270 people are still missing. The military leadership has declared this a week of national mourning. A junta is also not responding to requests for a ceasefire in the country's 4-year civil war. Media on the ground reports that fighting is continuing from the junta's side and they have heavy weapons shooting inside. son of former civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, says a prison housing his mother is believed to be largely unaffected by the earthquake. Over in Thailand, 19 people are confirmed dead. The situation in the country has largely returned to normal, according to the Prime Minister, but rescue operations continue amongst the rubble of a high-rise building that collapsed in Bangkok, where 12 people are now known to have died. We can return now to our conversation with Johnson Chukwu on those tariffs being imposed by the United States. They take effect this week, especially around the world, in the UK. And as far as the US government decides to take them, President Donald Trump suggested the new tariffs that he is set to announce this week will hit all countries, not just those who have the biggest trade imbalances with the United States. Johnson Chukwu, I'm glad that you could rejoin us. You were talking about why President Trump has decided to go this route.
Yes, actually, what I was saying is that Donald Trump had actually set out 3 objectives in his tariff initiative. One is to raise revenues or raise tax revenue to cover the U.S. budget deficit. The second factor is to reactivate or reignite manufacturing activity in the U.S. And the third factor is to use tariff as a tool to drive foreign policy. Those 3 objectives, which they call the Trinity, I think one of the investment banking firms in the world actually described as Trinity, are difficult to achieve as a single, in a one-sweep move. Because reality is that you really can't use tariff to drive revenue at the same time encourage manufacturing in your local economy, because those tariffs are going to lead to increase in costs, which will lead to increase in inflation rate in your country, which will constrain consumption. And anything that constrains consumption will have a knock-on effect on manufacturing, because manufacturing will slow down and people are not going to invest further in manufacturing because they won't be able to sell whatever they produce. And the other aspect is that if you use tariff the way he's in the random way, what he is actually is attracting negative social capital and emotional capital from other countries. And nobody respects it. Nobody admires a bully. Look at what he's doing, what he did to Mexico and Canada when he insisted on 25% tariff. That's still on, the negotiation is still ongoing. He had to suspend it when those 2 countries had to introduce some Turkish border control policies to strengthen their border control. And today he's talking of Venezuela. He's saying that he's going to impose secondary tariff on countries that import Venezuelan oil. Only today, I think yesterday, he announced a similar threat to imposing tariffs on Russian oil. So these things are too random and too sporadic that they will not ultimately achieve the foreign policy objective of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it is upsetting global trade, isn't it? And not just trade between the United States and some of these countries you've mentioned, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, Russia now, as well as some of the U.S. allies like Canada and the United Kingdom. But are these tariffs sustainable in the long run?
I think what I would think is that the economic impact of this will hit home. I've mentioned some of the knock-on effects. Donald Trump is going to see a spike in inflation rate in the U.S. You're going to see consumer spending decline as people are unable to afford the same quantity of goods as they used to afford with their income. And he will also going to see manufacturing, instead of onshoring, they will offshore, because if you create major barriers to U.S. market, the manufacturer in the U.S. will look for alternative market. And in today's world, the U.S. is just one of the major economies in the world. Yes, they're the biggest economy in the world, but China is gradually rivaling U.S. India is coming up strongly. The European Union as an economic bloc is quite huge. And these countries can actually trade among themselves, which is what would drive away investment from the U.S. So instead of encouraging investment in the U.S., it will discourage investment in the U.S. So I think the reality will hit home. He's going to reverse some of these policies. For instance, he has actually set out to achieve low crude oil prices, low gas prices. His threat to impose tariff on countries that import oil from Venezuela has led to a spike in crude prices. If you look at ICE this morning, it has moved from about $500 to $650 per metric ton for AGO, that is for diesel, to about $680 per metric ton. Similarly, crude price had moved from about $68 before per barrel before he announced this tariff on Venezuela to about $73. That is the Brent crude, to about $73 per barrel. So that obviously is against his set objective. So I think the economic reality check will hit home, and I believe he will have no choice than to reverse some of these policies.
Right, and they're also affecting U.S. stocks. Reading this morning that as stocks are falling, Tesla stocks are down. We also read about the Japanese Nikkei. It's also down. The FTSE 100 also trading lower, opening early trade in low figures. This will be a huge impact to global trade, especially when these tariffs go around the world, like Trump is threatening this week.
Yes, the reality is that what Trump is doing is that countries are going to go into some level of trying to be economically autonomous or independent. And that will lead to countries producing even goods they don't produce efficiently. And anything that constrains global trade will lead to overall increase in goods and services across the world, which will constrain production. And there's already concern today that if these policies, by the time other countries go into the retaliatory tariff imposition against U.S., we're going to get to a point where prices will increase. At the same time, you are going to see lower economic activity. So there's a threat, there's concern that we could lead to a stagflation where you have high inflation rate but low production without a commensurate increase in economic activity. So in fact, you have a decline or a contraction in economic activities. At the same time, you are dealing with high inflation rate. And that's likely what will happen. So eventually, globally, we're going to see a slowdown in economic activities. I think the World Trade Organization, Mrs. Chairperson, Mrs. DG, Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala had said earlier that a tariff imposition, reciprocal tariff across the world, could lead to a slowdown in global trade by about 5 to 7%. And that will have a knock-on effect on economic activities, production, consumption, employment, and all those things will lead to a slowdown in global economic activities and possibly a global recession.
So can the WTO help stall this or prevent it?
No, unfortunately, WTO is not in a position to do anything. WTO was actually anchored around U.S. policing and enforcement authority. The U.S. was the anchor for WTO, World Trade Organization. Today, the U.S. is the one that is vitiating and canceling all the terms of WTO. As you may have known, Amarachi, the U.S. government last week withdrew all funding for the WTO. So they defunded World Trade Organization. And the actions they are taking are all unilateral, and almost all of them against the tenets and the philosophy of World Trade Organization. So who will police the policeman? As it stands today, if this trade initiate unwarranted, let me use the word unwarranted trade war that the U.S. government has triggered continues, we may see a complete unraveling or this WTO becoming a useless or disused organization because there has only nothing to adjudicate. They cannot enforce anything. And China, that used to be the whipping child of the U.S. as it relates to non-compliance with WTO, is now the one that pushing that we should all abide by the terms of the World Trade Organization. So I don't think World Trade Organization has any capacity to police the one that we used to police others.
Yeah, a global tip in the balance of global power. But who's looking out for Africa, though? How will the continent be able to show up against these changes?
Now, Marachi, the good news is that the African economies are hardly dependent on U.S. exports. If you look at Nigeria's import bills, if you look at Nigeria's import, Nigeria imports about 27.8% of imports from China, followed by India and other countries. And then if you look at export, our largest export goes to countries like India and Netherlands. In fact, the U.S. does not even feature among the top 5 export destinations from Nigeria. In terms of import, we import about 6.36% of our total import. And that's the same thing featured in almost all African countries. So African countries import is coming largely from the Asian countries, China and India, while their export is going mostly to the European countries, the Netherlands, Spain, and to some extent India. India. So I don't think, as it stands today, that US is a major trading partner to African economies, other than maybe to some extent South Africa. But of course, they have already started a trade war, a dispute with South Africa. So South Africa has to focus more east and then trade more with India and China, who are also strong trading partners to South Africa.
Yeah, interestingly, China does have firm footing on Africa. And speaking of South Africa, not just a trade war with South Africa, there's also a diplomatic row that the US has with South Africa. Johnson Chukwu, really appreciate you joining us on the program today. Stay with us on The World Today. Still ahead after the break. Muslims around the world participating in the celebration of the end of the holy month of Ramadan. Welcome back to The World Today. It's been 4 days, since the 7.7 magnitude earthquake hit Myanmar on Friday, and a number of countries were affected by the 7.7 magnitude earthquake, Thailand being the worst of them. 4 people were rescued alive on Sunday from rubble caused by the earthquake in Myanmar. The search efforts continue at several sites across the country, many waiting anxiously for news of their loved ones. The rescuers have been working for the past few days.
Rescue teams and volunteers have been seen outside rubble of collapsed buildings all across Myanmar. Locals watch as the rescue workers try to recover what they can. On Saturday, the emergency crews worked to free survivors trapped under the rubble of collapsed buildings. Even now, rescue operations are still ongoing. It's the 3rd day since the quake, and rescue work has been made slightly difficult by another earthquake that hit earlier Sunday. A 5.1 magnitude earthquake that hit Mandalay, one of the worst affected areas from Friday's disaster. However, hopes for finding people alive is fading. As for the site of a 30-story Chinese-constructed building that collapsed in Bangkok on Friday, approximately 80 people were inside when disaster struck. 10 of them were found dead at the affected site, including one body that rescuers pulled out of the debris on Saturday night. Meanwhile, on Saturday, Chairman of Myanmar State Administration Council, Min Aung Hlaing, appealed for assistance from international and local communities. He urged precaution to citizens concerning aftershocks, calling on the urgent need for relief efforts. Responding to the call, China sent in an 82-member team equipped with specialized gear and aid supplies. Malaysia sent a 50-strong disaster relief and humanitarian aid team. Bangladesh Air Force servicemen were seen preparing the CASA C-295W aircraft at the Kermitola base in Dhaka on Sunday to deliver the humanitarian aid to Myanmar. And Russia is sending a combined squad of the Russian Emergencies Ministry to help handle the aftermath of the quake.
Well, staying with the Myanmar earthquake, millions of children are at risk following that devastation in the country, compounding an already dire humanitarian situation on the ground. UNICEF is now warning of the escalating impact on children and families, and those with need especially rising by the hour, and aftershocks continuing. They're also calling for international community to respond with urgency to support life-saving efforts for children and families. families. The earthquake and aftershocks caused widespread destruction across central Myanmar, including Mandalay, Naypyidaw, Sangam, Bago, and Shan regions, according to official figures. More than 1,600 people, now we know there's more than 2,000, have died since the earthquake struck. Homes, schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure have sustained severe damage. Landslides and collapsed roads have left communities without electricity and mobile connectivity. Families already surviving in fragile conditions now face even greater hardship with limited access to safe water, healthcare, and shelter.
It's early morning and I'm here at the UNICEF Global Supply Hub in Copenhagen, where the team is busy packing and preparing life-saving supplies to send to Myanmar for the children and the families affected by the devastating earthquake. This response is supported by DG ECHO and the European Union, which helps make sure that we're able to get these life-saving supplies on the ground for women and children as soon as possible.
We're off to the Middle East. Dozens of Israelis organized a protest in Jerusalem on Sunday, demanding the government bring hostages held by Hamas home and stop the war in Gaza. Protests have continued in several Israeli cities since the resumption of military operations in Gaza on the morning of Tuesday, March 18. It comes after a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas took effect, which involved the exchange of prisoners and hostages between the two sides. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed on Sunday the Israeli Security Cabinet has decided to increase pressure on Hamas in order to secure the release of the hostages.
I believe the most important thing to let the state to be here is only if the hostages will be back. The only option for them to be back is if Benjamin Netanyahu will do the deal in one piece, not lots of pieces. One deal and everyone's supposed to be back.
We are here to demand from the government, from Netanyahu, to return back the hostages and to stop ruining our country and stop the bloodshed, stop the war, because this is not the direction Israel needs to go to. This is not good for anyone. We are worried about our country, we are worried about our children, we are worried about the future. We are worried about all the bloodshed and the hostages that are being left at the mercy of a terror organization, and we are here to shout and say enough. He's trying to make all people who are responsible to protect democracy, from the general attorney to the judges to everyone else, to the head of the secret services, he tries to make them his loyalists. Instead of them protecting Israel, he wants them to serve only him and only his interests. And we are very worried from where Israel is going under Netanyahu.
Meanwhile, hundreds of demonstrators marched through New York City on Saturday to mark the Palestinian Land Day, condemning an escalating genocide in the enclave and denouncing U.S. support for Israel. The annual Land Day commemorates the 1976 killing of 6 unarmed and injuring of over 100 Palestinians by Israeli forces during protests against land confiscations. The protest also served as a call for action for a large demonstration in Washington, D.C., slated for April 5.
We are marching on Land Day, which is a day that every year people around the world come out in support of the Palestinian cause. This time it is different because we are marching against the escalation of the genocide against the Palestinian people. Also against the Trump administration attempting to scare the movement into submission. We are also marching because we want everyone to know that in Washington, D.C. on April 5, we will be there from around the country to stand up to Trump and stand against Trump's ethnic cleansing plan.
Well, those protests also held in Madrid, Spain on Sunday, calling for an end to military action in Gaza. Demonstrators marched with banners in Spanish reading "Always with the Palestinian Resistance" and "Stop Genocide in Palestine." The protest coincided with the 49th Land Day, which began in 1976, when Israeli forces reportedly killed 6 unarmed Palestinians and injured over 100 during protests against land confiscation. Since then, Palestinians have held protests and vigils and planted olive trees to demonstrate how their support for their homeland and rights. Similar protests have also been holding in Lyon, Valencia, Toledo, Murcia, Twente, Guadalajara and Malaga. It comes after Israel launched a new campaign of airstrikes against Gaza during Ramadan following a 2-month truce. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement March 18 announcing the resumption of Israel's war in Gaza, adding the strikes were just the beginning and noting he had received U.S. President Donald Trump's support for the action. On March 30, a complex week-long rescue operation concluded with the recovery of the bodies of 15 colleagues, 8 from the Palestine Red Crescent Society, 6 from the Palestinian Civil Defense, and 1 from the United Nations. These co-workers found themselves buried in the Tal al-Sultan area of Rafah in southern Gaza. Available information indicates the first team was killed by Israeli forces on March 23rd. And the other emergency and aid crews were struck one after the other over several hours as they searched for their missing colleagues. They were buried under the sand alongside their wrecked emergency vehicles, clearly marked ambulances, a fire truck, and a UN car. The first body was recovered on March 27. The remaining 14 bodies were recovered today. OCHA took part in the recovery efforts on behalf of the UN, coordinating access with Israeli authorities who identified the area where forces had buried the bodies.
Health workers should never be a target, and yet we're here today digging up a mass grave of first responders and paramedics. 7 days ago, civil defense and PRCS ambulances arrived at the scene. One by one, they were hit, they were struck. Their bodies were gathered and buried in this mass grave. We're digging them out in their uniforms, with their gloves on. They were here to save lives. Instead, they ended up in a mass grave. Their vehicles, their ambulances, UN vehicles, civil defense vehicles are crushed and dumped, covered in sand next to us. It's an absolute horror. What has happened here?
On the silence of all of this, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday welcomed his Greek counterpart, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, in Jerusalem for talks aimed at strengthening bilateral cooperation on security, economy and defense. During the meeting, Netanyahu stressed that this visit reflects the close relations between the Greek and Israeli people. Mitsotakis reaffirmed the significance of Greece's ties with Tel Aviv. During the visit, the Greek Prime Minister met with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog to unveil a new scholarship program for Israeli students wishing to study in Greece.
Welcome, Prime Minister Mitsotakis, my good friend Kyriakos. This is two blue and whites that meet. We're two ancient peoples. Our free civilization started in Athens and Jerusalem. We have common values, and we share a common interest today, and also common challenges. I think that we face many opportunities. I look forward to discussing them with you. You are changing Greece's economy. We went through a similar process. Our ties are constantly increasing. I know of many Israelis that are going to Greece, investing in Greece, which is a vote of confidence. And I look forward to having this opportunity to discuss the security challenges, the economic opportunities, and the ways that we can increase the chances for a lasting peace in our region. All
right, heading to the United States as U.S. billionaire Elon Musk gives away $1 million checks to voters in Wisconsin after the state Supreme Court refused to intervene. Musk announced the prize earlier this week ahead of Wisconsin's tightly contested Supreme Court election to be held tomorrow. Wisconsin Attorney General and Democrat Josh Kaul had sued to stop the giveaway, arguing that Musk was violating a state law that bans gifts in exchange for votes. The race, which could flip control of the state Supreme Court to the Republicans, has become a flashpoint and the most expensive judicial election in American history. Speaking at a rally Sunday night, Musk said we just want judges to be judges. That's, of course, before he handed out two $1 million checks to voters who had signed a petition to stop activist judges. Musk's lawyers say the payments are intended to generate a grassroots movement in opposition to activist judges, not expressly advocate for or against any candidate. After two lower courts sided with Musk, Kaul begged the state Supreme Court for an 11th hour reprieve, but the top court unanimously declined to hear the case. We have our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, to help us make sense of this, I guess. Maria, thanks for joining us on the program. Now, this is looking like deja vu, just pretty much like before the election, which I must say impacted how people voted. You had an Elon Musk giving away well, millions of dollars to people who would vote for Trump in the elections. And now he's doing almost the same thing with this judges election in Wisconsin.
Yes, by about November the 4th, give or take a day, $17 million have been given out. And so it is clear that this is very similar to what we saw during the election cycle. Now, as you mentioned, this judicial voting time period is one of the most expensive that we've ever seen in American history. When you think about Wisconsin and kind of where it sits in the country and kind of that being one of those swing states, and a state that at this time is extremely important to the larger American landscape of politics, having this type of $1 million payment, I think, sends a signal. The question really is around the legality of this. If you look at the Attorney General that obviously tried to stop it, tried to say that this was against the law, but obviously the courts thought otherwise. The question, though, is whether or not now that we are in the Trump administration, now that we are officially past the campaign season for the federal government, specifically the presidential race, will this be something that we will see other lawsuits brought forth, and will this make it to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, there are much more questions to ask about that. I mean, one, for example, is why this isn't considered as interference.
I think that's really what we're going. I mean, it happened so quickly. If you just look at kind of the time frame, you look at this was brought before a judge in Wisconsin. It was basically thrown out and said, nope, it's legal. And then the check has been provided. And so when you think about, there was not a lot of time to even have this make it to the Supreme Court. So now that this has occurred, will there be further actions brought forth? Will you see a case continuing on further, and what the Attorney General will do as a next step and measure?
Maria, I see there's very little uproar for what Elon Musk has done. I don't know if this is because many of Trump's supporters are just afraid of the president, or anyone in the administration is afraid of going against the grain of what currently exists, because we all know that the president is fully behind Elon Musk, who's leaving by the end of May. He said so. He just has a mandate up until, I think, the month itself. So very little opera against what is currently going on. Why is that?
Well, I think if you look at what's happening, you even take this incident specifically with $1 million check. This is so outside of what we've seen traditionally in American history, especially when you think about the election cycle and you think about the way in which the government and obviously the private sector operate. And specifically when you think about cash payments of this nature, we have not seen this traditionally in American history. So I think the surprise around what's happening, I think people are quite sure how to respond. I think you're seeing the legislative branch of government and those on the other party side of things, they are trying to speak out. But the question is around the process that it takes to be able to address these sort of what are perceived potentially. In this case, the Attorney General felt this was an illegal action, but the process that he must go through to move that forward is one that just takes time.
Well, everything taking time, I think that's the only excuse the courts have at this time. But looking forward, well, I can't imagine what American elections will be like from now on. Millions of dollars spent in trying to influence a voter's choice at the elections. Maria, can America afford that?
Well, I think that this is definitely a time and period in American history that we might not see ever replicated again. Many Americans would not have the courage or the boldness, I think is really what this is. This is really about bold moves by the administration. We've seen bold moves from the beginning, from day one. When you have a president that walks from the inauguration and walks to the Oval Office and signs, tons of executive orders in a matter of moments. This is an administration that is very clear that they are making bold moves and that they are looking to go against the grain. And the American people, I think, are not always prepared. And there are Americans that have supported the president that are supporting his bold moves. Those who do not support his bold moves, I think, are not in a position to really know how to respond because the traditional way in which the U.S. government operates is a checks and balance system. But in this case, what we've seen over the last few months is not a checks and balance system, is an executive branch of government that has taken executive actions.
Indeed, it has. Well, pretty interesting times ahead, Maria. Thanks again for the explainer. Well, we still have more after the break here on The World Today. Yep, it is spring, so thousands of vibrant plums are blossoming in full bloom at a festival in South Korea. Stay with us. Welcome back. A 56-year-old man is being investigated in South Korea on suspicion of starting a deadly wildfire that killed 30 people. The man who's not been named was performing an ancestral rite by a family grave on a hill in Gyeongsang County. That's North Gyeongsang province at the time. He had been booked but not arrested and will be called in for questioning once the investigation of the site has been completed. He denies the charges. On Sunday, officials said the man had finally been brought, said the main fire had finally been brought under control 10 days after it started, causing widespread damage to buildings, including historic temples. Investigators reportedly spoke to the suspect's daughter, who is said to have told them the fire began as her father tried to burn tree branches hanging over the graves with a cigarette lighter. The fire subsequently burned more than 48,000 hectares, equivalent to about 80% of the area of the capital, Seoul, according to the Korea Forest Services. The position of Nigeria on the international stage has been dwindling over the years due to a number of factors. It's according to former High Commissioner to Australia, Ambassador Ayo Lukani, who suggests things can pick up again with the appointment of new ambassadors to missions that have been bereft of these important state actors for about 2 years now. He was sharing his thoughts with me on Diplomatic Channel.
The question of perception of Nigeria is that we're not pulling our weight. That is clear, that we're not pulling our weight. And why are we not pulling our weight? At least in some areas, there are very many reasons for that in terms of what, and I sincerely hold that. I mean, one of the things which should be done is to get substantive ambassadors in place. It is key, it is very important. President Tinubu is doing a good job. But when the president goes around and they assure him of foreign direct investment, at the end of the day, who follows up? Yes, the mission is there. In the diplomatic service, the position of an ambassador is key, is very, very important. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Let me give you an example. While I served in Vienna as CDA, Chargé d'Affaires, when the president of Austria wants to meet traditional things, to meet members of the diplomatic corps. We chargé affairs are just at the end, down, maybe over 100 countries. So the ambassadors with substantive paper, plenty potential ambassador, who comes yesterday is ahead of you. And when you want to see the foreign minister or a particular minister in one place, you are chargé d'affaires, they will just say, look, please go and see the desk officer. And that was why I was saying that I think it wasn't good enough for us not to have an ambassador when President Trump was being sworn in. It's not good enough for us not to have a permanent representative to the UN when the UN held Summit of the Future. It's not good enough when the question of Ukraine crisis and things like that are going on, and then we don't have ambassador in Moscow, we don't have a substantive high commissioner in London, we don't have ambassador in France. Those are the 5 big members. And I sincerely hope that very soon, like it has been promised, the list of nominees, ambassador nominees, will go through the Senate for approval. And don't forget, there still has to be processing the agreement. That takes 6 months. Now, you need your ambassadors to be able for your voice to be heard properly.
You can watch more of Ambassador Lukani's thoughts on Diplomatic Channel. It airs tonight at 8:30 in the UK on Sky 515 and 11:30 p.m. on DSTV 420. As Muslims around the world and in South Africa celebrate the Eid, marking the end of the Ramadan, some Nigerians living in South Africa calling for stronger ties between their country and Nigeria and the broader African continent. They're advocating for greater business opportunities, improved education, and a future where African youth can thrive at home rather than seeking success abroad. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, takes a look at the hopes and aspirations of Muslims on this special day, exploring their vision for the continent's future and Africa's role on the global stage.
The Nazimiye Mosque, built by Turkish philanthropist Uncle Ali, is the largest mosque in Southern Africa region. It is the festival of breaking the fast as Muslims in South Africa celebrate Eid al-Fitr, marking the end of the holy month of Ramadan. We've been speaking to Nigerian nationals living here about their hopes and dreams. For many, this is not just a time of spiritual reflection, but also a moment to reflect on the continent's future, its economic growth, unity, and the well-being of its people.
We pray that all our prayers are accepted by Allah, all our sins are forgiven, and we also pray for the continent to be a safe place, a peace place for everybody, especially South Africa. It's a great country which we pray for peace, harmony, and love for everybody.
Well, the unity is really important because without unity, there are lots of things that we can't achieve. Unity is really important, and what our leaders are lacking, I think, is unity.
Some express hopes for a more united and prosperous Africa.
Now first, as we say, تَقَبَّلَ اللَّهُ مِنَّا وَمِنْكُمْ, so what we're saying is that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of you and from all of us. And this unity, this togetherness, this being together should not just be for the Eid days, it should be for every day of the year. We should not wait for the next Eid, we should not wait for the next month of Ramadan. We should actually be celebrating this togetherness right through the year.
So we believe that with unity and understanding and collaboration, peace and stability will be brought in our African continent, and we will live in prosperity and also dignity in this continent.
But what role can African leaders and the diaspora play in shaping the continent's future?
As our religions teaches us as well that we must stay together, we must be united. As you've seen today, there's hundreds of people today together, they're celebrating Eid, they are together, and when you're together, you're much stronger. That's the message which it's quite clear that if we are together as African countries, we can send a clear message to the world as well that all African countries are united. you know.
The spirit of unity, development, and brighter future is echoed by many in the community as they gather to celebrate Eid. Their message is clear. Africa has what it takes to rise, but it requires collaboration, leadership, and a shared vision. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
And no better way to signal the start of spring than when the plum blossoms are in full bloom. And that's what marveled visitors at the Gwangyang Meha Festival. The magnificent plum trees fill guests with wonder as they stroll through the plum farm, sitting beneath the blossoming branches while savoring delicious plum foods and wine, soaking in the breathtaking scenery. Booths offer a wide array of related products and informative exhibition highlighting the cultural significance of plums in Korea, complemented by live entertainment for everyone to enjoy. Mesil, the fruit of the mewa or plum blossom tree, ripens in late May and in early June. Its juice is used in various products including alcoholic beverages, skincare, in food as well as in traditional medicine. On a programming note, the one-to-one show, a current affairs conversational program, debuts tomorrow, Tuesday, April 1st, on your award-winning station, Channels Television. In this first episode, the chairman of Air Peace, Alan Onyema, speaks about the progress made in the aviation industry and challenges, and of course, the strategies to reposition the sector. Well, we'll have details of the one-on-one show. Just stay tuned to Channels Television tomorrow, April 1st at 6:30 p.m. For the first episode. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.